Welcome to episode 19 of the Cycling Europe podcast. My name is Andrew P. Sykes. I hope lockdown is going as well as it can, wherever you happen to be and whatever the circumstances. Although we may be confined to our local areas, I hope these cycling-themed podcasts allow you to dream of the days when once again we're allowed to travel a little further afield. Recently we've heard from the likes of Mark Beaumont, who has cycled the world, Helen Moat, who travelled alongside her 18-year-old son from Derbyshire to Istanbul, and Paul Gentle, whose attempt to cycle from Tarifa in Spain to Nordkapp in Norway was scuppered in Nice when the coronavirus closed the borders of Europe. All these cyclists started their long-distance cycling careers by one day deciding to move out of their comfort zone and do something a little different. That's what I did in 2009 when I set off on my first long cycle. I can clearly remember the uneasy, uncomfortable feelings that I felt at the time and the questions that I asked myself. What the heck am I doing? What do I look like? Have I got the right kit? Have I got the right bike? Shall I just go home and forget about the whole thing? They're all natural questions to ask, and I can almost guarantee that the people I'm speaking to in today's podcast, just like Mark Beaumont, Helen Moat and Paul Gentle, and all the others, were asking themselves the very same questions before they set off on their first long-distance cycling tour. They are Abigail Melton and Lilith Cooper, and they've just written about their experiences as first-time cycle tourers in a new book which is published in June called Gears for Queers. Welcome to the podcast, Abby and Lily. First of all, you two are known as a pair as Gears for Queers. Could you individually introduce yourselves and explain just a little bit about your background, where you're from and where you're living now?
Yeah, so I'm Lily.
And I'm Abby.
And I grew up in Cambridge, kind of born and bred, and we met 6 years ago in Cambridge and lived there for a while and moved to Scotland 3.5 years ago now, and settled in Kirkcaldy in Fife, which is where we live now, about 1.5 years ago.
We're a couple. I'm originally from King's Lynn in Norfolk, and I went to university at Edinburgh, which is sort of why we ended up moving back a few years ago. I'd enjoyed my time there, and although I'd moved to Cambridge in between, sort of wasn't enjoying Cambridge quite as much as I wanted to.
So I grew up cycling, and it's always been the way I've got around. Neither of us can drive, but I've never not been on a bike. But when we met, Abby didn't really cycle at all.
I cycled as a kid and a bit as a teenager, and did one very catastrophic cycle ride from Hunstanton to King's Lynn when I was about 14, where my pedal broke off. That was fun. But since then, I hadn't done any riding at all. So when I moved to Cambridge when I was about 23, I think it was, I realised that I needed to start cycling to get about. The public transport is great, but it was expensive, very expensive. And I needed to get to college and also just around. So I asked Lily to help me learn how to sort of cycle again. I'd never cycled on roads before, so it was something that I was really quite scared of. And for at least the first 4 months, I refused to make a right turn at all. So every route that we took, Lily had to do some sort of odd circular route around Cambridge. But that's how I got back into cycling. I wasn't a big cyclist. It was commuting that got me back into it, really.
And since then we've been on 2 long cycle tours, and obviously we've written the book about our first tour, which is out in June.
Okay, so pause there. A couple of quick questions. First of all, how old are you?
We're both 20. Well, I'm 29 and Abby's 28, but she will be 29 in June, so she can stop looking so smug about being younger than me.
And you mentioned the book. The book is called Gears for Queers. It's published by Sandstone Press on the 4th of June of this year, 2020. And it's all about your journey from Amsterdam to Montpellier in the south of France. When did that journey take place, and what motivated you to embark on such a long journey in the first place?
So the journey took place in 2016. We'd originally planned to leave sort of in spring, but that kept getting moved back. So we didn't leave until August that year. And originally, I think, so I'd finished university and I'd gone to do teacher training at Cambridge and had dropped out because it just wasn't what I expected and I wasn't enjoying it. And so I'd ended up just sort of working a job that I enjoyed but wasn't my passion. And Lily was just finishing university. So I think we both felt a bit stuck in a rut and not sure what we were going to do afterwards. And a little bit as well, like we might just end up being stuck sort of in Cambridge around our family for the rest of our lives if we weren't careful, because we were just, it was comfortable and we wanted to push ourselves outside of that a little bit. And for originally I sort of thought, well, why don't we just walk around Europe or walk around the UK or do some like long walking thing. And I think basically on our second date when I met you, I mentioned this and Lily was like, well, why don't we cycle it instead?
Yeah, I think it was that feeling of wanting to try something different. I think I don't particularly remember coming across the notion of cycle touring, especially like I can't remember this kind of light bulb moment. And I didn't know anyone who had done a cycle tour at that point. But when I mentioned it to my mum, she mentioned a friend of hers called Una, who she actually lives in Richmond in Yorkshire. And she and her husband had done a cycle tour. They'd done the Danube. And she was like, oh, Una did something like that. And that sort of made it feel possible, maybe. So I think, yeah, that's kind of crystallized it. And we were like, yeah, this is the thing that we're going to try. We're going to try doing. We're going to try stepping out into the world to do this.
And I'm going to quote from the very first bit of your book, from the preface of the book. It says, we felt uncomfortable staking claim to the identity of cyclists and struggled to feel our trip was legitimate. We spent hours scrolling Instagram, comparing ourselves to other cycle tourers who had completed their trips in a way we felt we hadn't. We persevered because we didn't want to perpetuate those narrow ideas of what cycle tours and cycle tourers looked like. So clearly, reading that, you identify as somebody who doesn't necessarily fit the stereotype of a cycle tourer?
I think kind of that's partly grounded in a discomfort with claiming the term cyclist at all. And I think partly that comes because both of us, and especially kind of me originally, like used cycling as a form of transport above all else. I think, you know, one of the things that the current situation is really illustrating to us is that we're not inclined to be leisure cyclists, and we find it really hard to cycle just for fun, which sounds kind of antithetical, like when you're talking about it in terms of like cycling and advocating for cycling, but like realistically when we cycle, it's to run errands, it's to get to work, it's our way of getting about, and it's really important to us in that sense. It's our way of traveling, but it does sometimes make you feel like you can't stake a claim to being a cyclist because you don't do any kind of like sportives. I've never cycled with a club. We don't own like proper Lycra or fancy bikes. And so I think that fed into maybe feeling not totally legitimate as cycle tourers either. The fact that we didn't really know what we were doing and we kind of shacked up on the tour with all of this luggage and wearing like kind of cotton shorts and t-shirts that we got from Sports Direct and like massive hiking boots, and feeling like we were looking through our Instagram feed at these like well-composed images and people kind of articulating maybe like a fearlessness that we didn't have as well. I think that feeling of like it's easy and it's carefree and kind of outdoors is free and you can just go do it didn't translate to how we were feeling, which was terrified and ill-equipped and illegitimate. And I think all of that fed into not feeling like proper cycle tourers.
I've got some good news because I have got in front of me now your Instagram feed, and I've scrolled back to 2016 when you're just setting off from Amsterdam, and I have to say you're doing a remarkably good job in terms of your Instagram pictures of fitting the bill as bona fide cycle tourers. You've got your 10, you're kind of exploring the regions that you're visiting, you've got loads of food on there, you've got your pictures of you on the bike, meeting people, etc. I think actually you're doing a pretty, via your Instagram feed at least, you actually have done a very, very good job of saying, hey, we are bona fide cycle tourers.
But I think that is also kind of maybe a good point about Instagram, in the sense that I think lots of people, the things that you present to the world through Instagram is this lens that doesn't necessarily capture a lot of the stuff going on.
It's very much like fake it till you make it as well.
Yeah.
I think so much of it was us trying to show this very designed image of what we were doing. And you say it's all, looks quite real and cycle toury, but we definitely posted a lot of pictures of us like crying on benches and struggling as well. Certainly in our stories, I think, maybe not so much on our posts. I don't know. But yeah, I think it was about trying to like instill some confidence, I guess, in ourselves by putting this image out to the world, which I think is what Instagram
is a lot about sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the secret is just don't believe everything you see on Instagram, which is not just about cycle tour and about life in general. Okay, the basic route that you took from Amsterdam to Montpellier, can you talk about that?
We discovered the Eurovelo network when we were planning, and we thought this was a fantastic thing that we needed to follow, because we didn't really know anything about cycling long distance at all. So this seemed like a very nice, easy way of like easing ourselves into cycle touring. So we decided to follow the Eurovelo 15 for as much of it as we could. I think at the time it was the only one that was, I'm not sure if it still is, but it was the only one that was fully signed and completed. So it made sense for us to start with that. So we got the ferry over to the Hook of Holland and could have continued on the Eurovelo 15 from there. But at the time we decided we wanted to visit Amsterdam and sort of do some camping and get used to, because we'd never really camped either. So we needed to get used to the idea of just being outside and doing that small amount of cycling around Amsterdam. So we ended up sort of, after getting very lost on the first day, finding our way to the Eurovelo 15, and then following that all the way towards Hut in Switzerland. And then from there, it was about finding other routes that could take us down roughly where we wanted. When we'd set out on the tour, originally we had very little idea of where we wanted to end up. I think we'd sort of decided we were just going to go away for a year, and we were going to sort of go down to Spain and winter in Spain. And then we were going to, go off into Italy and round the rest of Europe. But that didn't quite turn out that way.
Yeah, so we ended up coming down towards Hut, and then we made our way kind of diagonally cutting through Switzerland along the Aare and through the Three Lakes region to Geneva. And then from Geneva, we'd planned to join the Rhone to try and keep heading south, but we weren't getting south fast enough. And because we'd left that bit later in the year, we decided to kind of shoot south via train and avoid the kind of like widdly bit on the Alps. And we took the train to Lyon in France, and then we followed the Rhone cycle route basically straight down to Montpellier, and then ended up in Montpellier.
So from what you've just said, I'm guessing that actually this wasn't necessarily all set in stone. You were pretty flexible about the whole thing, and you were just using it almost like a conduit to get to the southern part of Europe, at which point you'd decide what direction to go in.
Yeah, I think we found the notion of the Eurovelo routes quite reassuring. We arrived without really a map or any proper maps or any much idea of how to find routes. So I think we found, we were just like, this follows rivers and therefore will probably be flat, which, because we come from the fens, is quite an important criteria for us. But also this seems quite straightforward and quite well established, and kind of like almost held our hands through the process of navigating kind of across Europe on our bikes.
You've made no bones about the fact that you were out of your depth, and you've just mentioned there the fact that you had a few issues finding perhaps the route in the Netherlands to begin with. Do you think it was a brilliant idea to get high on drugs in Amsterdam to kick your journey off?
I think it was the worst mistake we've ever made in our lives, I think. Like, retrospectively, I don't know what we were doing. I do know what we were doing. We were relaxing and being on holiday, but I think we woefully misjudged everything about that day.
It certainly didn't instill us with any confidence for the rest of the trip. I think we both came out of that feeling like we'd just we had no idea what we were doing and we were just children.
For those who haven't either read, we've got a blog post about this and it also features in the book. Essentially all we did was completely misjudge how long we should be spending in an Amsterdam coffee shop. And we ended up just crouched first in the only Marks and Spencers in like the whole of the Netherlands, feeling very disorientated because we were convinced we were back in the UK, and then just crouched by a canal, kind of like me gripping my pannier bag, convinced we would never make it back to the bikes. So it was quite it was a bit of a confidence knocker, to be honest, because we just felt like we'd had this like catastrophic first ride trying to get to the campsite, which should only have been 20 minutes from Amsterdam to Durgedam. And then we'd had this catastrophic day where we apparently just couldn't be trusted to be in a big city. And it just didn't seem to bode well for this kind of like venture off independently into the rest of the tour.
Well, it's the best advert for not mixing drugs and cycling I think I've ever read. It didn't sound like a brilliant experience. So how long, bearing in mind this was the first presumably overnight or long distance cycle trip that you'd embarked on, after how many days or even perhaps how many weeks did it take you to feel comfortable about being cycle tourists?
I think for me, maybe it was a couple of weeks of getting used to the long distance cycling in general. It was a bit of a shock how much it hurt to begin with, and it took a little while just to get used to that bit. And then, I don't know, maybe a month into it, I started to feel a bit more confident in myself and in the cycling we were doing, and I guess staking a bit more claim to this idea of being cycle tourists. We were learning so much as we went along. There were so many things that we had no idea what to do or how to do it. And, you know, we never really deviated from the Eurovelo 15 route to begin with, because we were just so frightened that if we went off at any point, we were just going to get so catastrophically lost and not know how to get back.
I think for me, I felt like I fell very comfortably into the kind of physical aspect of cycle touring. I think I came at it with a much higher level of just like basic fitness, because I was doing a lot of running before we left, and also just a lot more confidence on a bike. I think for me, what I found more difficult was staking claim to the notion of cycle touring from a kind of like a different angle. And I think it's something we talk about in the book, like as an example, like I used to call my mum pretty much every day during the tour just to check in with her. And I kind of had this panic sitting in this campsite after speaking to her. I was just like, other cycle tourists probably don't call their mum every day. I've got a long history of kind of like mental health challenges. Both of us are disabled. And I think that changes what it is to kind of be in the world and the sort of support systems that we need around us, and that makes stuff like this, like cycle touring, possible. And so I think sometimes like the difficulty I had staking claim to being a cycle tourer was that like I could happily do 100 kilometers in a day with a fully loaded bike and be feeling okay. But at the end of the day, I might feel overwhelmed by the thought of like having to like interact with someone in a supermarket. And it felt like, you know, nothing, I was never like the complete package of the like independent, self-sufficient cycle tourer. I'd always need like support or people to help me to like do things independently, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're probably not the first cycle tourer, and certainly won't be the last one, who calls their mother every day, I would have thought. I think there are probably plenty of them out there. They're probably just a bit reluctant to admit that they do. So that was one aspect of it, the mental health. There are other aspects that make your tour slightly different. Veganism is one of them. How tricky was it maintaining a vegan diet, cycling through, especially the Netherlands? I always think of it as a kind of a meat eater's heaven.
I think we found that actually it wasn't too bad in general, so long as we were willing to put up with quite bland and similar fare, in the sense that we could always get the sort of basics that made up our diet anyway, like stuff like rice and lentils and beans. We ate a lot of bean sandwiches. And actually, I think because of the Netherlands' proximity to Germany, Germany's vegan scene is incredible. It's like 2 years ahead of the UK's. There's like aisles and aisles of vegan food and like so much good vegan stuff. And I think that does feed into the kind of stuff you can get in the supermarkets in the Netherlands too. So there was always options there. And actually on our kind of return trip to the Netherlands, the last tour we did in 2019, we found a couple of really nice vegan places to eat. And that kind of like culture, like kind of the vegan culture also, I think, fed into the kind of like the Swiss supermarkets. The big challenge we had was actually in France in finding anything other than like beans and baguettes and peanut butter and lentils, which wasn't so bad because we were on a budget. So we were trying not to go wild and actually had to be quite restrained in Germany. But yeah, definitely, I think by France, we were hankering for some like vegan like treats, I guess.
I think the only thing we felt like we were missing out on, especially in the 2016 tour, was the sort of experiences I think of when I think of cycle touring, which is that sitting in a restaurant on your lunch and, you know, enjoying local produce, which obviously you don't get to do as much. Again, in Germany, especially last year, we did eat out a lot more than we ever had done on a cycle tour before, because it was so much easier to find little cafes and restaurants. But yeah, France still has a long way to go.
But saying that, I also think, you know, when we left, we were worried about the ways that our veganism might impact our ability to like really embrace aspects of the tour, like things like warm showers hosts like cooking for us and like going out for meals and stuff like that. But then things had happened, like we ended up in France. We basically knocked on a door in a village because the pump for water, we were meant to be wild camping and the pump for water wasn't working. So we knocked on a door next door to try and just get some water, someone to fill up our bottles. And we ended up being invited to stay with this woman and her family. And she kind of was like, I've got to take the kids to a piano lesson, but when I come back, I'll cook you some food. And we were like, absolutely not. Like, we're vegan. It's like way too complicated for you to cook us something. We will sort ourselves out and then come back. And she was like, no, don't worry about it. And we turned up at her house and she and her 3 kids had cooked us this like amazing 3-course vegan meal with like fresh tapenade and like stewed pears with chocolate sauce for dessert. So I think sometimes we were anxious about the ways that like the veganism might impact on our ability to like embrace kind of like some of the joys of cycle touring, but actually generally that wasn't the case.
And in some ways it actually made it even more exciting when we got to a place that had really amazing vegan food. Like some of the best moments on both tours were the times when we found a restaurant or cafe that had stuff that we'd never seen before in the UK and there was a place in Strasbourg that had basically a delicatessen and a load of patisserie, and it was just, again, in France. So like, I don't know why we're claiming France isn't that good for veganism.
I think when we're talking about France in terms of veganism, it's often this, like, we're basing it mostly on supermarkets because we do majoritively cook for ourselves. So that mainly dictates like our impression of like the food in a particular country is what's available in the supermarkets and what's cheap as well, because we were trying to stick to a budget.
Yeah, but this place in Strasbourg was one of the highlights of the entire tour for us. It was so special to be able to just sit in this little cafe outside and enjoy some French wine and eat amazing food.
Even though it was like quite a long walk there, and Abby spent the entire walk there telling me that if it wasn't the best vegan food she'd ever tasted, she'd never forgive me for it. So I'm glad she rates it so highly.
Well, I'm scrolling through your Instagram and I'm just looking at the pictures of the food. I mean, goodness me, I'm starving now. It looks delicious. But,
yeah, we eat a lot. Like
we're really into our food, aren't we?
How did you find the camping? Had you had much experience of camping beforehand?
No.
So we'd both done D&B, Duke of Edinburgh Awards. I think only to bronze because neither of us completed our volunteering section, which this is separately as well. We were just equally bad at our respective schools. But apart from that, I'd been camping maybe once or twice with my family, and we did one camping trip prior to going on the tour as an experiment to see how we found it, which was really good, and we both enjoyed it. But yeah, that was camping maybe 3 times with family, a couple of times with friends, but that was about it for me.
Yeah, I camped with friends, but not really in like any proper sense. I think it was a very steep learning curve, both in terms of like the practicalities of camping, but and also just like where you spend your energy. And we kind of love it now. And I think it's something that we really miss at times like these when we can't go camping. But also, I think Abby's more practically minded than I am. I will go kind of like the circular route to complete a practical task. So I feel like I did rely on her quite a lot for some of the kind of things that I found more intimidating. Stuff as simple as like I'd spent at least 2 months of the tour just being terrified of the gas canisters and the like stovetop bit that you had to screw in to like make food. Whereas Abby was quite pragmatic about it and was like, I'm just going to do it and this is normal now. But it took me longer to adjust to some aspects, I think.
Yeah, I definitely I was confident putting up a tent before we left, and I was confident, like, I took to it, I think, a lot easier than you did.
Yeah.
You mentioned the tent. In terms of equipment, what tent were you using? And also your bikes, what kind of bikes were you on?
So the tent was a Van Gogh Pulsar, the 3-man one, because we wanted the big porch, and also because like Abby's fat and we wanted space within the tent to be comfortable.
Yeah, I agree with you completely there. I think every time I've bought a tent, it's got bigger and bigger and bigger. The first time I crossed Europe on a bike, it was a 1-person tent and it was dreadful. And I think now I'm up to at least a 2-stroke 3-person tent. I think you always need a tent which is able to accommodate one more person than you've actually got.
Totally, and we were going to be spending like 3 months in just this tent, so it seemed like sensible to have a bit of room, especially with the two of us, where sometimes you do just need some space, you know. And then in terms of the bikes, we basically fitted up bikes that we already had, more or less. We kind of knew that we didn't have a real budget to spend on our bikes, partly just because we wanted to prioritize saving to actually do the tour. So we knew we wanted steel framed ones because we kind of trust them. And I feel like steel can just be, well, as we found on the most recent tour, steel can be welded, which is really useful when parts of your bike snap off. So we kind of settled on sort of looking for steel framed mountain bikes. I got mine from Gumtree for like 40 quid. It was like a Dawes 90s mountain bike. And Abby, we got hers on Gumtree as well. And that was a Dawes Sterling bike. It wasn't a mountain bike, it was one of our older touring bikes. And we saw it, we went to see it and have a chat with the guy who had it. And it was beautiful. It was like a proper lugged frame and just like really lovely made. A little too small for her, but we were just like, this will be fine. Like this can't go badly wrong. And then what we did was basically kind of adapted them to be our touring bikes. We were really lucky that at our kind of local bike shop in Cambridge, which was Flat Planet Cycles on King Street, Mark, who's the guy who runs it, is like an amazing bike mechanic and just a really great guy. And we brought these bikes into him and we were like, look, we want to go on this tour and we kind of want to start setting these bikes up. And he was like, well, I'll help you and we'll do it basically part by part, work out what you need, work out according to budget, and ultimately just go for it and like live your lives now and have fun. Which was a really lovely message and just meant that we kind of like fitted up. I kind of kept my wheels and changed tires. We got new wheels for Abby's bike because the wheels really weren't up to scratch. We switched to butterfly handlebars to be more comfortable and changed Abby's seat to a more comfortable one, and then fitted back pannier racks to both of our bikes, and then easily fitted a front pannier rack to my bike because it had the little holes to put it in. And then Mark bodged us a solution to fit in a front pannier rack to Abby's bike. And that was sort of the bikes ready to go.
Yeah, good decision to change them to butterfly bars because they are by far the most comfortable bars that you could ever use. How anybody could embark on a long distance tour with drop handlebars, I do not know. My back is just too old and decrepit, I think, to cope with drop handlebars. So yeah, butterfly bars all the way. In terms of the people that you met, you've already mentioned the people in France and the family who cooked you vegan food. Did you encounter many other cyclists? Did you encounter many locals? Do you speak any French, Dutch, German?
So we were a little bit scared actually about talking to people. I think it was part of our anxiety was about the sort of interactions we were going to have to do on the tour. But we ended up staying with a few people in warm showers who were absolutely wonderful and spoke English, because unfortunately our languages are
Passable.
not. Our French is our best language, but even then it's not fantastic. Because we were quite late in the season, I think we would have met a lot more people had we been cycling in summer. And there were still lots of cycle tours about, but I'm trying to think. We didn't meet too many, did we?
I think it's interesting because, like, when I remember it, I do remember, we met quite a lot of tours, like certainly at like key kind of junction points. So in Basel at the campsite there, we considered that being quite busy with cycle tours because there were maybe like 3 or 4 other cycle tourers who were camping there at the same time as us. But last year on the 2019 tour, we ended up at the same campsite in Basel coming in on the Eurovelo 6. And because we were coming in kind of the middle of summer as opposed to the start of autumn like we were in 2016, we were like, 2016, sorry, we were like, oh, this wasn't busy at all, because when we came to the campsite in 2019, there was maybe like 30 cycle tourers in this one campsite all crowded onto this kind of like tiny bit of grass. So I think, the time of year that we were cycling meant that we didn't kind of come into contact with that many cycle tourers. But where we did, it was kind of an overwhelmingly positive experience. Well,
yeah, it was.
When we did, I would say it was majoritively positive. I think we occasionally felt like we didn't quite fit in with some of the tourers who we met because of the way that we were touring, because that we couldn't talk to them about the things that interested them, and they maybe couldn't talk to us about the things that interested us. And I think that maybe caused us to like have a little bit of distance. But I think also partly like we're quite introverted people anyway, so we like to have space too. But overwhelmingly, like the people we met, the tourers we met were like lovely. And like there was a feeling of kind of like community. And I think when you get a bunch of cycle tourists together, it seems only a matter of time before everyone starts like pulling out maps and like getting up data and advising you on routes and like telling you stories. And I think that's one part of cycle touring that we really love, is like that sharing of knowledge and stuff that you can't necessarily just like pull off Google. And that's been invaluable to us, really.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about that, on the first tour, there were so many things we wouldn't have seen or routes we wouldn't have gone without having spoken to people about it. So we didn't realise the Rhinefall existed until someone mentioned that we should maybe cycle an extra 40k just to see it. Especially in Switzerland, we met a load of really great tourers who helped us choose the flatter paths to get us through those particularly hilly regions that we were really struggling with. So that was invaluable, really.
Yeah.
That is by far the biggest advantage, I think, of staying on a campsite. Apart from it being enjoyable and you're in your tent and you kind of your own little movable home and you feel at home in it, but just the fact that I can't think of another method of accommodation where you actually get the chance to not only meet but spend time and fraternise with other people who are doing a very similar thing to you. You can't do it in a hotel. You can do it to a certain extent in a hostel, but again, people tend to stick within their little group. But when you're in a campsite and you're camping, you tend to just, either before you've eaten or perhaps afterwards with a glass of wine, you sit there on the grass and you've got nothing to do apart from chat to the people who are on the next door tent. And if they're cycle tourists, it can be a fantastic mine of information for your trip. And it's just that for me is kind of wow. Why does not every single cycle tourist go camping?
Yeah, I think we're both nodding our heads enthusiastically at the moment. I think we both agree that camping does give you that extra
sense of community. I think it really taps into that, which is just lovely. Yeah,
and I think there's a sense of adversity in perhaps uncomfortable situations sometimes, and that bonds you together with other cyclists as well. But anyway, in terms of the high and low points, emotional high and low points, what were they for each of you?
I think the low point may actually be a joint low point. We were cycling to Avignon, and we had possibly the biggest argument we've ever had in our relationship. And It was mostly down to the fact that I'd had a chest infection and we'd been holed up in this tiny little like Ibis budget hotel on the edge of a huge roundabout on like a huge A road for about 4 days, and I still wasn't feeling quite right. And it was the first time we'd come off of a cycle route, assigned cycle route. So it was the first time we'd been having to use maps to create our own route. And we ended up getting ridiculously lost and very angry with one another for getting lost, and had this huge argument where we sort of both quit and then didn't quit and were screaming at each other. And it was possibly the closest we got to ever sort of, I don't know, I think it's probably the closest we've ever been to breaking up. Like we were so furious with each other. And in the end, we sort of had to come together and just get through it together, even though we were furious with each other because we had a place to get to. But yeah, that for me was definitely standing on a canal with Lily's bike in a puddle because they pushed it over in anger, and me just like tears streaming down my face was potentially the lowest.
From the perspective of a potential viewer, that sounds wonderful. Two people.
Yeah, it had a certain amount of drama to it, that's for sure.
Two people having a rollicking argument by a canal with somebody pushing each other's bikes. That sounds, God, you could have charged money for people to watch that.
Yeah, and it had like a comedy element too, which is then I couldn't get the bike out of the puddle because it was too heavy. So I kind of stormed off, and I'm there grappling with this like wet, mud-laden bike, like repeatedly dropping it into this puddle like it's some kind of Charlie Chaplin skit.
So that was both of your low points. How about the highlight of the trip?
So I think for me, it's maybe split between two things. I think there was a day we were riding through the Upper Rhine Valley, which, if you kind of don't know, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, I think. And it's this kind of beautiful sweeping valley with castles and vineyards. And it was the first bit of the route that really felt like it was going downhill and was just easy cycling and kind of really dramatic views. And it really felt like we were in our groove cycling. And we were cycling along and we spotted, we needed the bathroom. And we thought, let's treat ourselves. Let's find an actual bathroom. So we cycled into this like small town to the kind of tourist information. And they kind of pointed the way to like some public toilets. And the public toilets were next door to a kind of like a Roman baths that had been refurbished in the 90s, I think, into this lovely kind of like thermal bath spa setup. And we kind of both looked at each other and were just like, can we not do this? Like, this seems the right thing to do. And we'd spent kind of a long time getting into the like rhythm of cycling and feeling confident and comfortable. But I think both of us had been kind of like holding on to kind of the routine and the route and the plan as a way to feel safe and a way to like manage some of the anxiety of being on the tour. So deviating from that was a completely new thing for us. And we were like, but we'll have to leave our stuff outside. And eventually we were just like, let's just do it. Let's just do this thing. We both really want to do this thing. It's not in our plan for the day, but we've got time for it. And what's the point of doing this if we're not doing the things that we want to do? So we went for this swim in these kind of thermal baths surrounded by these like kind of like elderly German people, very confused why their midday swim had been disrupted by these like two people kind of shacking up, like covered in mud in like ill-fitting swimsuits and just like rollicking around in the water. But it was like a beautifully sunny day and the baths were like the perfect temperature, and it was just totally joyful. That was a high point because it was unexpected and it was just a moment of sheer joy away from the cycling or the worry. And it was something that we'd never have got the opportunity to do if we hadn't been cycle touring, because we'd never have just chanced upon it. That was like probably my high point.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, that was a fantastic day. The entire Upper Rhine Valley was amazing. I think some of my high points were actually in France near the end. There were, when we were cycling through the Camargue, especially, just the scenery around us was slightly reminiscent of being back in Norfolk, and it was sort of beautifully, it was warm but it wasn't too warm, and the roads were quiet, and at points we saw flamingos, and there was something quite magical about this very quiet landscape that we were just rolling along. I don't know, there was something quite special about that area. I don't know whether because knew we were near the end as well, that made it particularly special to me, but it was a calm I haven't really felt in any other part of my life before. That just being at one with the bike and just moving steadily through a landscape is something that's indescribable, I think.
Well, I think you've both highlighted two areas which a lot of cycle tourists will have been cycling through and will recognise for being just kind of wonderful places to be on a bike, both that quintessential Rhine Valley in Germany, and then in the south of France, that area, kind of the Camargue, and then heading west towards places like Montpellier and Sète, where it's just fantastic cycling. So yeah, I think those are two fantastic top tips if anybody finds themselves in those kind of areas of the world. Now your journey, it kind of finished in Montpellier, but then again it didn't. Can you explain what happened after Montpellier?
Yeah, so we left the bikes behind in Montpellier, or we sent Abby's bike home by courier because the wheels were worth over £100. But we actually left my bike with a bike shop that had like a community scheme, kind of reusing bikes because it wasn't worth the £100 it would cost to ship it home. So we left bikes behind, sent our panniers and stuff home in a box, and set off on foot towards Portbou, which is a town that's just kind of past the Spanish border on that coast from France. And from there, we took a train to Barcelona and decided to spend a couple of months there, sort of figuring out our next steps and what we wanted to do. I think we decided to stop cycling in Montpellier essentially because I felt like I'd reached my limit. I think, when we left for the tour, I'd been out of hospital for 3 years. I'd been kind of discharged from mental health services for 2 years, and I'd only really just stopped seeing probation services. So it was a big transition for me and a big leap out into the unknown. And I found that I was kind of running low on energy and running low on the resources for day-to-day stuff, or to come up against the sort of challenges that you do come up against every day cycle touring. And that realization, we sort of decided that actually some time of like rest and routine and staying in one place would be a good idea, and that we'd check in with how I was feeling after that period. So we got to the end of those 2 months, and I sort of felt like I wanted to go home and I needed some more time to recuperate, and then we could go out traveling again. So we headed back to Cambridge in January and went to stay in my old childhood bedroom at my mum's house, with the plan that in March we'd leave to walk the Camino de Santiago, which is something that we both wanted to do. So I started working for Deliveroo, making the most of my newly acquired cycling long distance skills to deliver takeaway food to the fine people of Cambridge. But Abby started to feel kind of poorly and was getting sicker and sicker. She was in a lot of pain, and we kept going to the doctor and trying to figure out what was going on. And actually, about a week before we were meant to leave for the Camino, she ended up in hospital with kind of a failing liver because she had gallstones and one of them had blocked her bile duct, and they hadn't kind of spotted it. So that meant that we had to reassess our plans because she got put on a waiting list. She got better in hospital and got put on a waiting list for surgery. And we decided that, whilst we were waiting for this on the NHS, we should kind of stick around in the UK, basically. And that was when we moved to Edinburgh and sort of put the cycle touring plans on hold for a bit to give Abby some time to recover and to have the surgery and then recover from that. So it sort of kind of jutted to a halt. And I think both of us felt like we had unfinished business with kind of cycle touring, which sort of led to our 2019 tour.
Yeah, it took us those sort of 2 years to earn enough money to get back out cycle touring, and also to both feel well enough to go back out. And yeah, we finally got back on a cycle tour last year, which was great. But it was a very strange ending. I don't think it was the ending that either of us wanted. I think we both kind of envisaged cycling back into Cambridge as sort of the heroes of our own story in a way, and we didn't. We got ill and tired and waddled back home, basically.
When did the idea of writing the book come about? Is that something that you always intended doing, or is that something that was an afterthought?
So we're both zine makers, and we've been making zines since about 2015 when we made one about, that was during the time when the tampon tax was quite big in the news, and we decided to make
a couple of... I'm going to stop you there, sorry to interrupt, because a lot of people will have no idea what a zine is. Can you explain what a zine is?
Yeah, of course. So a zine is a sort of homemade DIY pamphlet or booklet, usually... well, it can be about anything, but they're often about something that someone's really into. So a fanzine is where most people might have heard of them. They were quite big in the 80s and 90s at sort of alternative music gigs. And people, well, fans would write these little pamphlets and booklets about the particular band or their favourite singer or whatever, and pass them out or sell them for a couple of quid, people coming into the gig. And I mean, they have a longer history than that, but they've sort of had I'd say a bit of a renaissance recently. There's a lot more people making...
I think they're much more visible now because of the internet. So you can really, it's much more easy to tap into like zine culture and to look at zines. And if you are curious to look at zines, we run a zine library in Edinburgh, which is the Edinburgh Zine Library. And that's on Twitter and Instagram. And there's photos and stuff of zines there if you're curious to see what zines can and do look like.
Yeah, but the great thing about them mostly is that they're a space for marginalised voices and for conversations about things that potentially are left out of mainstream media, because they are handmade and they're often made by people whose voices are left out of mainstream media. So yeah, they're quite radical and cool.
So we made zines when the first zines we made were about kind of menstrual health and looking at the tampon tax and the impact of period poverty. And then when we came back from the 2016 tour, we started a series of zines called Recipes for Wild Vegans. And that was about being vegan and cycle touring and camping, and basically the recipes that we kind of were making regularly on our little camp stove, that were balancing, calories versus taste versus time cooked versus how much can you squeeze into one of those tiny saucepans. And we made 2 of those, which kind of through sort of the Edinburgh zine scene made their way into the hands of Kay, who's an assistant publisher at Sandstone Press, which is an Inverness-based independent publishers, and who also became our editor. And so basically what happened was Kay messaged us and was like, would you be interested in turning these zines into a book? Have you thought about writing about the tour? And we were like, yes and no. We would be interested, but we hadn't thought about doing it before in any real way. We met her for coffee in Edinburgh and just had a chat with her, and she was really kind of encouraging, enthusiastic, and sent us away to sort of have a look at writing, say, 10,000 words and trying out, like what it was to write a book together, like how we'd share the narrative, like how we felt writing about the tour or writing even something of any length. And we kind of sent those 10,000 words into her, and she sent us an email back being like, these are great and we liked them, like get up to 40,000, have a look and have a think about these things. And then we can look at maybe a contract and getting this published and you write in the second half. So the book really came about through that and through the kind of like the help and support of encouragement of Kay. And I think, she pursued it because Sandstone publishes a lot of outdoors writing and a lot of stuff about that. And she was really interested in kind of diversifying their list and having maybe some like different voices and different stories, which is kind of why she invested that time and energy in us. And we're really grateful for that. But that's sort of where the book came from. And we really just learned as we wrote.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the process, I think we're both kind of shocked by the fact that the first 10,000 words were picked up by Sandstone, because when we look back at our writing then, they must have seen something in it that we can't see in it, because we were not convinced. that we were good enough writers for it. But it was definitely an experience writing a book, and one that we learned a lot from. And I think, yeah, it was great, wasn't it?
The book itself is actually organised, it's on a daily basis, so you're writing about each individual day as a kind of almost a diary, and you both write chapters, but you don't necessarily alternate one day one person, the other day the second person. Did you both write about the same day and then decide which had the better account of that particular day, or did you decide, yes, I want to write about that day, I'm going to write about that day, and divvy it up like that?
So we were really keen on having it as even a split as possible, and there were certain chapters that were very easy to choose who would write that and who wouldn't, because there were certain things that either of us wanted to write about in particular that it just made sense for that person to do that particular chapter. And then there were some chapters that we definitely fought over. In fact, the Avignon chapter, the one where we have a massive argument, we actually included both of our descriptions of that because we're still undecided who was in the right during that argument. But it was a lot of sort of compromising, but we never really wrote the same chapter twice.
No, I think fairly early on we decided that essentially the rough structure would be one person would write the day and then any rest days that followed from that day, and then it would switch to the next person. So we'd try and effectively alternate days of cycling more or less, and then the kind of rest days around that, with the exception of things that, you know, as Abby says, events that we felt particularly strongly were like our story, or like a thing that happened to just one of us. Yeah, I think we avoided writing every day and then deciding, essentially because we are terrible at time management and just cracking out the 45,000 words each, you know, because we were balancing actual kind of paid jobs and like life stuff alongside it. So we also were trying to be, I think, efficient as well as everything else.
I think the other thing, when we first sat down with Kay to talk about it, she was very keen that we obviously maintain different writing styles and different voices. And I think when we found that if we both wrote the same bit, our voices tended to merge a bit, and then it was harder to separate our individual voices. So it made more sense for us to stick to the chapters we had chosen to write. Otherwise, we risked that merging of voices, which we didn't want to do.
One of the most difficult things about writing a book, and I speak from experience, is deciding or trying to work out what the title of the book is going to be. And I've spent many days, certainly many hours, as I've been cycling, thinking, right, when I write this into a book, what the hell is the book going to be called? And it's a good way to occupy your mind. I think your title should win some kind of award in terms of being inventive and a little bit humorous. Gears for Queers. Who came up with that?
That was Abby, 100%. And she didn't even come up with it as the title of the book originally. So she just kind of came up with it as our Instagram handle when we were looking for a kind of slightly pun-based cycling/queer Instagram handle. And then we'd originally thought about titling the book something like In Low Gear or something around that. And then Kay was just like, well, it seems silly not to call it Gears for Queers. And we were like, let's do it. Like, yeah, so that's Abby 100%.
And your next book, it can easily be adapted because you can call it More Gears for Queers.
yeah, we were definitely planning ahead.
And then even more gears for queers, and it could go on forever.
Yeah, 2 gears and 2 queer.
Gears right. Queers take their drink.
Yeah.
We started off with that quote from the book about you feeling uncomfortable staking a claim to be cyclists and touring cyclists, and you know that uneasiness about setting off and thinking, oh God, am I the right person for this? You have no excuse now. You are bona fide cycle tourists, long distance cycle tourists. You've written a book about it. People will come to you now, and you have kind of helped redefine. I hate to use this expression because it seems to be everywhere, but you've kind of tweaked the normal. So you are the new normal when it comes to long-distance cycle touring. If you were to give one piece of advice to anybody who is setting off in a similar position in terms of their thinking, is this the right thing for me? Should I be getting on a bike and cycling to wherever I want to go? What would that one piece of advice be for each of you?
So I think I probably say you can never be ready enough. I think there's an overwhelming desire to manage the anxiety and the feeling of vulnerability that comes with cycle touring by preparing and over preparing and feeling like if you just read enough lists and enough blogs and have the right kit, somehow that'll protect you from needing to rely on other people or needing to reach out for other people. But cycle touring throws unexpected spanners in every spoke all the time, and actually what you have now and who you are now and the bike you have now is probably enough. So you're already ready enough to go. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I think I definitely mirror that as well, especially like you don't need to be fit enough. You're fit enough already. Just sort of do it. I guess in a similar vein, I think my advice would be to remain as flexible as possible when touring. You may go into it with a very fixed plan of what you think you're going to do, but like Lee said, it's you're going to get things thrown at you. You're going to find out about amazing things that are 40 kilometers off your route that you just should be doing. And yeah, I think being flexible is possibly one of the most important things that you can do.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think being flexible and not planning too much, because plans make you be a victim of your own predestined decisions. Go with the flow and be willing to, if needs be, change everything at the last minute. Yeah. Okay, well, I think, I'm going to look forward. I've read bits of the book and I'm looking forward to reading the whole thing. We've got plenty of time this summer, so certainly going to do that. What's the next big adventure for you in terms of either cycling or life in general?
So I think our big aim is, once kind of the lockdown period is over, to have a go doing the Great North Trail that Cycling UK, I think they launched it last year maybe. So it's a completely off-road route from, I think, around the Peak District way up, all the way up to Cape Wrath. And we saw a presentation about it at the Cycle Touring Festival. And we were just like, I think the 2019 tour we did made us feel like actually we're feeling kind of equipped and brave enough to have a go doing some kind of longer distance UK stuff, and especially stuff in Scotland, because we love touring here and we love the freedom that like kind of access laws give you in terms of wild camping and stuff. So I think whilst the world is kind of changing, that's like a good thing to aim towards once kind of things are settled.
Yeah, I think we thought we were going to do maybe Ljubljana to, down Croatia originally, but obviously things have changed significantly since then. So yeah, focusing on UK-based tours is our
big aim.
Our big aim. Yeah, we actually, the other thing as well is when we cycle toured in 2019, we were originally going to go from Kirkcaldy all the way to Plymouth. We made it to Carlisle and Lily had to have a tooth out. And so in the end, we got a train from Carlisle to Cambridge and then did Cambridge to Portsmouth instead. But I think there's a desire in both of us to finish that bit between Carlisle and Cambridge, to just link up that part and perhaps even then link Portsmouth with Land's End and Kirkcaldy with John O'Groats. We've finally done the whole Le Jog. So yeah, I think that would be one of the next things, yeah.
And you mentioned the Cycle Touring Festival. You are making a zine about that, and the deadline for submissions is the 23rd of May, I think?
Yes, so we're inviting everyone to contribute 1 or 2 A5 pages about cycle touring, about a tour that they've done. It could be recipes, it could be photos, it could be tips and tricks. And these can all be emailed to Lilith and Abby at gmail.com. But also all the information about submitting is on our website.
Yeah, which is gearsforquiz.co.uk.
Okay, brilliant. I think we've exhausted everything that we could possibly talk about, and that's been a fantastic, fascinating conversation. So thank you for sharing your experiences about cycling all the way to Montpellier and all the other bits and pieces that you've been involved in over the past few years. And good luck with your next, whatever it is, Gears for Queers, more Gears for Queers, even more Gears for Queers in the future.
Thank you very much. It's been really great talking to you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. Cheers. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please consider reviewing or rating it on the site where you streamed or downloaded it. iTunes, Spotify, Google, Acast, Overcast, Podbean, Player FM, or whoever your preferred purveyor of podcasts happens to be. The Cycling Europe podcast will return very soon. Thanks for listening.